and welcome to another episode of the Peru Channel Podcast. I'm your host, Philip, and in this episode, I'm going to try to explain what's happening in Peru's extremely complex political scene that is intertwined with the rising violent crime across much of the country, but that is especially bad in Lima and the big cities along the north coast. Sadly, we're going through another major crisis, and this time there's really no way to tell what's going to happen, but I thought I would give you a kind of an update on how we got to this point and maybe talk a little bit about the future, but the truth is the future right now, no one knows. At around 11:30 p.m. on Thursday night, Peru's Congress finally voted to impeach and remove the president, Dina Boluarte, from office. Shortly thereafter, the president of Congress, a man with little governmental experience, was sworn in as the new president, the country's seventh in the last 9 years. Jose Herri took office in the early morning hours of Friday, October 11th, thanks to his position as president of Congress, which is the prescribed procedure for a vacancy when there is no vice president. Boluarte had assumed office because she was vice president under President Pedro Castillo, who had been removed and arrested in what was probably the shortest attempted coup in world history. By the way, apparently vice presidents are only part of elections every 5 years and no replacement is made until the next election. That's based on the fact that this has happened over and over again since I've lived in Peru. Despite being Peru's first female president, Boluarte had been one of, if not the world's most unpopular leader. Polling consistency gave her approval at under 5% of the population, and that was only a point or two above that of Congress. Since coming into office, she had endured scandal after scandal. That's not uncommon in Peru. Some of them were minor, some of them seemingly to come out of some things that were a little bit out of her control, such as the killing by police of 49 protesters in southeastern Peru who were supporters of President Castillo and were defiant in his removal and subsequent imprisonment for his role in instigating the embarrassing attempt at a coup. She was blamed for the actions of the police despite only being in office a very, very short time, but she's also under investigation for other issues. Boluarte was impeached and removed after a unanimous vote of the members of Congress for her, what they called, quote, permanent moral incapacity, unquote, to fight organized crime, which is currently ravaging much of the country, especially in Lima. Violence in Lima and other places is centering around extortion of all kinds, but most notably that of transportation workers who have been murdered at an alarming rate for failing to make extortion payments. Homes and businesses have been bombed and shot up repeatedly with attacks occurring almost daily. With frequent marches and constant demands by the populace, as well as every other type of professional and business association, the consensus of Peruvians is that the government is doing nothing to curb the violence. Despite refusing to impeach her in the past, there is a popular notion that members of Congress finally decided to distance themselves from her and shift some of the blame for the country's problems only because elections are now about 6 months away on April 26th, and they want to set themselves and their parties up for the coming elections. Yesterday, on Herri's first full day as president, the 30-year-old lawyer went with a contingency of police and police officials to some of the city's most notorious prisons in an attempt to find weapons, communications equipment, and other illegal contraband that is well known as being used by gang leaders inside the prisons who, from the inside, are coordinating operations outside prison walls. While some items were reportedly recovered, it was not announced just how much contraband they found from the simultaneous operations at four of the country's most notorious prison facilities. National prison officials vow to increase surveillance, but of course that begs the question, why were they not doing so before? It's been nearly 3 days now, and Herri has not made any announcements of a new cabinet, though there is expectation that it will come probably sometime this evening or early in the morning when they will be sworn into office. The president is allowed under the Peruvian constitution to select cabinet members, as well as a prime minister who chairs the cabinet, according to the constitution, and this is usually done within a day or two at most. The only requirement is that the prime minister who chairs the cabinet will have to go before Congress to explain the new administration's policies. It has been reported that he's offered the role of prime minister to Boluarte's minister of the economy, Raul Perez Reyes. He has said that, Heri has said that he will keep some of the previous cabinet, and just a little while ago he said he's getting close to making an announcement. I thought about holding off and waiting till in the morning, but the truth is, I doubt many of you will recognize a single name on that list because in Peru, things change an awful lot and awfully fast, so probably every single name will be known mostly to political insiders. The problem with this taking so long, and this is a long time by Peruvian standards, is that any executive decree must have the signature of the entire cabinet, or maybe it's just a majority, I'm not sure. But if they don't have the signatures, they are not legally valid under Article 120 of the Peruvian Constitution. What that means is that there is no legal authority in charge of the country at the moment. The president can make executive decrees, but there's no legal backing behind them. One question that has always come up is how the current situation will affect Peru's monetary situation. This is one of the things that I was able to find a little information on this evening, and that's especially in relation to the value of Peruvian currency and the U.S. dollar. So far this year, the dollar has dropped in value 8.4% according to the Peruvian Reserve Bank, which is in line with the 8.5% decline worldwide. The value of the Peruvian Nuevo Sol, that's the official name of the currency here, has, however, remained the strongest in South America at this point. But there are concerns about how the current situation is going to affect the value of the sol in the coming months. The Reserve Bank chairman made a special point to remind everyone that they do not make predictions, but he did say that they are closely watching the situation very closely. Other analysts have said they expect the trend to continue, but they all say that no one can be sure as there's just great unfamiliarity. Let me try that again. There's great unfamiliarity with Heri and uncertainty about what his policies might lead to. Young Peruvians under the banner of a group calling itself Generation Z have announced that they will be marching against Heri today with a much larger protest planned for Wednesday, October 13th. Generation Z is calling on all citizens to join the marches, which they say will be peaceful and massive. While this will almost undoubtedly be concentrated around central Lima, including Plaza San Martin, Plaza 2 de Mayo, the Plaza de Armas, and Avenida Abancay, which runs in front of the Congress building, announcements are usually kept secret until the last moment to minimize police encounters as much as possible. If you're a tourist in Lima during the next few days, you're actively encouraged to avoid central Lima on Wednesday. At a minimum, traffic issues could be severe, but keep in mind that participation in protests is against the law for non-citizens, and anyone caught up in the protests could find themselves in jail. The main complaints against Heri are the accusations of enrichment through his positions and alleged bribery. There was something about it which was different from other protests I've seen in the 20 years I've lived here and been spending time in Peru. Moreno's entire cabinet eventually resigned, and that coupled with a heavy-handed response from the police resulting in some deaths, Moreno himself was forced to resign after only 5 days in office. The celebrations across the country were huge, and there was a sense among Peru's young citizens that the country's future lied more in their hands than they were given credit. It will be extremely interesting to see what kind of sway they can have over the country now should they choose to accelerate and increase their protests. There's going to be a lot more happening, obviously. There's been almost no reporting on any major protests in Lima so far today, except for a gathering at Plaza San Martin. Sunday's march, however, has been on the schedule for probably at least a couple of weeks now, and it has always been considered to be a much, much larger group or larger march because there have been calls for participation by many of the professional groups in Lima. I'll be in Lima then and am considering going to central Lima to observe the situation. I'll be honest, I've photographed and filmed protests in Peru over the years, but not in Lima, where the potential for a much more volatile situation is always present. Also, protests in Lima tend to accelerate after dark, and I have no desire to be alone even on the periphery of a protest at night. That, by the way, is also what might happen with today's protest, though there's no way to know until reporting starts coming out of the city. If you're coming to Peru or already in the country, keep in mind that these kind of political protests rarely affect tourism in the slightest. Protesters are concerned with their country and not with tourists. The only issues for visitors might be the closure of places to visit in the city center, as well as rerouting of transportation between the major tourist districts like Miraflores and Barranco and San Isidro and the airport. The population of Peru tends to be much more stable than perhaps the rest of the world understands. Right now, life is going on, and it's very likely a visitor will never notice a single change. In one other piece of news, the Cusco airport will be closed from 8 p.m. tomorrow night for 12 hours until 8 a.m. the next morning to perform runway maintenance. There has been something on the north end of the runway for several weeks, and planes have been turning onto the runway from a shorter access for at least a couple of weeks. Cusco already had an extremely long runway due to the requirements caused by the high altitude, and apparently there was no cause for concern about flights taking off and landing with only about 100 meters unavailable at the far end. I've flown in and out of the Cusco airport several times and never noticed excessive speed on takeoff or excessive braking. In fact, most landing planes never come close to needing the full runway and pull off to turn into the terminal many hundreds of meters before the end of the runway. LATAM has already notified its passengers about the cancellations and is making arrangements for scheduled flights or refunds. I'm not sure if other airlines even fly during those hours of closure from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., but if they do, I'm sure they've also made notifications and let their passengers know what's going on. Well, I hope this episode was useful, and I hope you gained a little bit of knowledge. Things here, as I said at the very start, are so much more complex than even most expats here, I think, understand. Anything more that happens will be reported on the news section of the PeruChannel.com website, and that's where the show notes are hosted. So if you click the links going to the show notes, just look up at the top of the page and you'll see a link to the news section. Please feel free to leave any questions or comments at the form on the bottom of the show notes page. I'm especially curious if you like the shorter form of this episode with breaking news. It doesn't happen all the time, and I couldn't do a weekly news type broadcast, but when there are big things, I think even though the episode is going to be shorter, and it might be something that everyone's going to be interested in. It takes a lot less time to prepare these than it does a longer topical episode, but it seems like English language news coverage of Peru by someone who actually follows what is happening across the country is almost non-existent. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you in Peru soon.